thanks so much for agreeing to meet with me today. And also, we're so glad to welcome you to the second online NCH conference. It's so wonderful that we can do it this way now and be able to have great speakers from all over the world, such as yourself. So thank you so much for agreeing to do that.
Really excited about it. I have to say, though, the downside of all these online conferences is that I no longer have an excuse to go to England, which I've been looking for ages. So,
well, we will make sure to give you an invite when we next do one in person. That's for certain. But for those people who haven't maybe come across your work before or are not familiar, would you mind just giving us a bit of background as to how your journey into the field of hypnosis came about?
Well, mine was a little bit unusual. I actually had my first hypnotic experience 55 years ago. And you might be trying to figure out how old I am. Well, I'm 55 years old. My mother used hypnosis to control the pain of childbirth. And I'm the fourth of her four children, and she started with her first in 1958. So she was, kind of ahead of her time for a lot of mothers. And she was very proud of the fact that she had used it. 4 times a year for each birthday, we got the story of that child's birth every time she would talk about it. And I used hypnosis. And it was only with the first one that she'd actually had a hypnotist who, kind of trained her and prepared her. After that, every one of them, she just tapped her arm, went off into hypnosis, and she said, I knew there was pain, but it was on the other side of the room and it didn't bother me. So I grew up with a different story about hypnosis. Most of us, the first story we get is Bugs Bunny, waving a pocket watch, eyes become spirals. And a lot of people, as we know, never challenge that story until they actually end up at a hypnotist office. But I had a different story. I was always really intrigued about hypnosis, but I didn't realize that my goal in life was hypnotist. Instead, I went off to college to study stories. I got a bachelor's degree in English and a master's degree in English. I minored in theater. And I really, realized the importance of story to human beings. Along the way, I experienced something that a lot of liberal arts majors experience: depression. And I wasn't really keen on doing a whole lot of counseling. I worked with one counselor who was, I really have to admire the wisdom of this counselor, because he said, okay, this is an Englishman. I'm going to give him a book to read. And the book was about life script. And the idea of a life script is you have a story that has somehow been programmed into your mind and you're living it out. So what you need to do to change your life is change your life script. And even though I only met with that counselor once or twice, that book made a big impression. Started going, and I started seeing it. I'm like, oh, wow, that person's life script is based on soap operas, and that's why they're always full of drama. And, that person's life script is based on an adventure, and that's why they're always going out doing adventurous things. So I said, okay, what's my life script going to be? Well, my life script was I wanted to be a college professor, of course. And I knew that as soon as I finished my master's degree, I would go teach at a junior college for a couple of years and then take off 4 years to get my PhD. And then I would become a college professor, respected and adored, like Professor Tolkien. Well, it turned out that the world wasn't really ready for that. That option didn't exist anymore. And so financially, I found that I was struggling a great deal. And I realized that my life script needed to be one of adaptation and finding a new way to get through. Now, in the meantime, I'd been doing a lot of storytelling. In college, I had gotten involved with medieval reenactment, which was people who would dress up like characters from the Middle Ages, and mostly they would put on armor and hit each other with sticks. My life script at first was that I was going to be really good at that, but it turns out there's a limit to what the physical body can do, and I was really bad at getting hit with sticks. Well, I wasn't bad at getting hit with them. I got hit with them a lot. I was bad at blocking and hitting others. But at night, we would all gather around a campfire, would tell stories, sing songs, and entertain each other like people did in the Middle Ages. So I got really good at telling those stories, and I started to notice that I could tell a story on a hot summer afternoon in Texas and make people shiver. I realized I could tell a story that got a bunch of guys who were about to go out and fight feel really proud and strong and go out and beat the enemy. and I started to realize words. And so I thought, maybe I'm a storyteller. I don't know. But then I was also, interested in this whole inner life and trance, and I was still kind of curious about hypnosis. I'd always heard, my mother's stories, so I started reading about it, started looking into it, and finally one day I just closed my eyes and I said, okay, I'm gonna think about what my future. And I believe that there is an inner wisdom, or maybe an outer wisdom. I don't know true which is which. But I said, should I study hypnosis? That be a thing that I pursue? A sure that came back to me from within or from the divine or from wherever it was. It's the thing you should study. So I said, but okay. I went, and through various mishaps, tried to find different teachers. Finally found the perfect one for that time. And about a week into it, she says, now another way you can hypnotize people is to tell them a story. And I said, really? And I realized, oh yeah, I've been doing that for years. So that's kind of how I ended up studying hypnosis. And of course, from day one, every one of the volunteers my teacher brought in for me to work with said, wow, you've got a great voice. Wow, you're really good at this. And I thought, well, of course, I've been practicing. I just didn't know I was prepared.
So you had a head start. What's your passion with it in terms of, there's so many various areas, like you say, in terms of trance and hypnosis, but you've always come back to the storytelling. That's your... So
I'd say that in terms of method, definitely storytelling is. In terms of the kind of issues that I like to work with, I realized that financially it was a good idea to get really good at smoking cessation. So I did. And I also love working with people who have stage fright, fear of public speaking, fears and phobias in general. I really love working with, because as a child, I was actually painfully shy initially. And I dealt with a lot of stage fright, a lot of lack of self-confidence. And so getting over fear is one of the things that I use hypnosis for, and this whole, kind of philosophy, creating your own life idea for myself. So I love helping people along. And I've worked with a number of other things, but really it always, I get excited when somebody says, oh, I have a fear of public speaking. I love to sing, but I get in front of an audience. Great.
I should imagine that's something that lends itself quite naturally to a storytelling type of an angle.
It does. And storytelling, it's kind of the multi-tool. There's a lot of different things that it can. Overall, my thought is that a client comes into my office with a bad story about their life, and I give them a better story. So I use a lot of stories. I use a lot of references. I just got done doing the session, and I made a lot of references to poetry, to movie. The stories that we tell each other in our culture, they are the dreams of our collective, and they carry the wisdom of all the people who've lived with us. So I'll often reference things like the or a Yates poem, because there's wisdom things that often helps out.
And in terms of what you're going to be talking about at the conference, is it very much around this type of idea of using those techniques with people?
Yes, I'm definitely going to be talking about storytelling. And a lot of people don't realize that they are better storytellers than they think. Very few people identify themselves as, oh yes, I'm a storyteller. But in fact, if you've just had a really lousy day and you get home and feel awful and your spouse says, how was your day? Instantly, you become a storyteller. And you start telling them all the things that went wrong and how they made you feel. And you take them on a journey of that day with you. And some people are like, yeah, but I'm not organized. I'll start here and I'll go off on a tangent and talk about something else, and then I'll go to something else, and then I'll come back around. And I'm like, yes, that's called nested loop storytelling. Milton Erickson is famous for using that to hypnotize people. Every movie we see has a subplot. So they go off on tangents. That's a natural part of telling stories. So one of the things I like to do is really help the people who come to story coaching find that storyteller within and find ways to make their stories more effective. Because like I said, all of us are storytellers, but that means it's a skill and we can all get better.
That sounds really interesting. And I know certainly from my own experience, it was definitely something that I used to doubt myself on in practice as well, that I didn't have that ability to weave that story for the client. I think particularly when you're starting out, as you build and you get more familiar and you do get more confident in what you're saying to people. But it's, yeah, like you say, it's a skill and it takes practice, and it takes that belief in yourself to realize that, yeah, you can just let it flow.
Yeah, it takes practice, and there are a couple of skills that are useful to make it better. Interestingly enough, a lot of them are the same skills we already study as hypnosis. A lot of us are familiar with the idea from P of a primary representational system, right? Of one of the senses, and usually one of the main three: sight, sound, and touch, that the client connects with best. And we're often taught, okay, here's how you emphasize sight, here's how you emphasize sound. Or if you don't know, here's how you hit all three of the big and maybe even the other two senses. So we're already taught sensory language. Well, that's one of the keys to good storytelling, is describing things in a way that you're creating a kind of a mind. I'm going to make a mind. And so if you get a little bit of practice with that, you get really good at it. So, if you're just taking a person on a beach visualization and you're just talking about them, what do they picture? What do they hear? What do they feel? What do they smell and taste? Well, you're essentially creating a little story. It doesn't have a complicated plot. The story is simply, you went on vacation and you're relaxing on a beach. That's the beautiful thing too, is you don't have to write the great American novel in order to be a good storyteller for the kind of work that we do. In fact, I'd say that it's possible to get way too complicated if you're trying to write something that would be movie length and have all these complicated subplots. You don't have to do nested loop. It's fun when you do. I have a video on YouTube where I think it's like 11 nested loops in this one story, and I had a chart off camera so I could keep track of where I was. And people love it, and I say, yeah, but it's really showing. You don't need 11 nested loops with a client. And sometimes I'll grab the first one or two and use them. And perhaps I'll adapt little bits of it. Perhaps I'll steal the story right out of the middle. But that's the beautiful thing, is that the wisdom stories that have been passed down to us are often very simple. And this is why people think of storytelling for children, because they're simple stories. So Aesop's fables, fantastic. A lot of the Nasruddin stories that come out of the Sufi tradition are really great, and they're really short. You could be forgiven for considering them to be jokes. And of course, jokes often have a lot of wisdom to them. And if you can use a joke and make your client laugh, that will break. That's getting into my other passion, which is laughing, but that's not all.
We'll save that one for another time.
Another time.
Well, thanks ever so much for talking to me today, James.